Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back, the two of us again. A little bit of an update on market changes, some interesting trade data to go through, a little bit of insight on US milk production, of course, the pulse for this week, and chat of the week. Let's get into it.
So some market changes to kick things off. Not much happening, really. It's quiet. Europe's very quiet. Everyone's away in there, as I mentioned last time, as everyone knows. Everyone's on holiday. Butter market's still moving up. Some concerns about the supply of cream and the availability of fat in raw milk is part of this. The weather maps, this is out of a report from the Commission that came out this week. It's called the Mars report. It's about crop and fodder condition. Quite a stark map showing where there's, water excess. They have some amazing terms in here they use to describe, very wet conditions and very dry conditions. So it's still affected by cool, wet weather in the west. And as you go further east, it's just got hotter and drier. And that's playing havoc with yields in two ways. Obviously, poor quality because it's been waterlogged crops and on the eastern side burning off. But this is an amazing map showing in the last 6 weeks the significant rainfall days, which is 5 millimetres, which is not a lot really, but
still wet. So more than 15 days in Switzerland. That's quite some summer they're having.
Yeah, it's a lot of water without snow. And there's some epic footage of floods and whatever going on. But so we've still got production challenges ahead, and this is very much a watch this space, we think, and what it does to milk solids. And then not a lot happening here. When you look more closely at this and you change the axis on the left-hand side, this looks more stark on a week-to-week basis. So really, we're just retracing here with going back a couple of weeks. So not a lot of movement there. A little bit of short-term movement, perhaps a little concern over production, availability of milk, maybe, and reduced output of non-fat in the US as part of that story. When you look at this chart comparing the forward prices, you could be confused.
Yes.
Europe and US, and the US higher, which is interesting because it's non-fat, a lower spec product on paper. And, where's the story end? I mean, I think GDT is probably closer to the market, to where the market's at.
Yeah, it makes more sense given the availability out of New Zealand will be increased from October onwards. So it's a bit hard to explain that future slope for NZX, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess the story evolves, we think, that those orange and blue lines move down. But anyway, we shall see. So Pulse was held last night, our time.
Yeah, not much movement there, Steve. Whole milk powder steady, gained $10 a tonne compared to the last week's event number 360. And for skim milk powder, it continued that slide. So another $50 US tonne down for this Pulse event. So yeah, not much joy there for skim milk powder really.
Given the history of Pulse versus auctions, could be indicative of where we go next.
Sure. Trade.
Had a bit of trade data come out, Joe.
Yeah. New Zealand exports came out for June. Overall, milk solids equivalent, we're 16% down for the month. We've had 3 months of moderate decline in New Zealand trade. Fats were 33% down in June and 22% for the second quarter. So really the impact of those increased prices, Steve, on particularly some of those developing markets and the affordability issues that are being felt there. There's a few products growing though. Milk protein concentrates have been strong as skim milk powder production falls a little bit and exports fall a little bit. Exports to the US up 90% in the second quarter, Steve, and 60% up in the first half. So certainly a big push there on MPCs. And combined a small decrease in milk proteins. But Steve, you've been looking at this skim milk powder MPC export issue.
Yeah, this is, I guess, pushing hard to avoid overproduction or over reliance on skim milk powder. Combined down just 8% in the month, but it's pretty flat. In the second quarter, it's a net change of 1.3%. So it's not much, but it is an interesting product mix shift that's helping manage the skim milk powder market, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see what the US industry does about that. At higher MPC imports, I'm sure there's moves to replace that with local output. China, Joe, also numbers that we don't like.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed story, but overall, year on year, the situation's getting worse. On a milk solids equivalent basis, imports were down 18% in June and 10% in the year to June. So fats are interestingly holding on, even as prices rise. You can see that increase in fat imports there. Also, a little bit of a bright spot there in whey, first increase in imports in a while, and also not too bad for cheese.
Skim milk powder is the one that's possibly most important to the global balance, and that is, as you see there, volumes on the right and the value in the dark line. Value is rising now. This is the price arriving at the market and getting worse as prices rise. So we've certainly been at these levels before, value-wise. You go back to about the same time last year, but we were shipping much greater volumes there when the expectation was a bigger bounce back. So the other big update that came out today was US milk production. Two sides of this story. Milk production in volume is down 1%. But the real story is milk solids production, which is up 1.3%, we estimate. Colleagues in the US have done an estimate on that based on recent trends, which is more reflective of, the growth in solids productivity coming out of the US herd. And you can see that's just building month to month. That's the yield gain per cow is lifting as cow numbers remain in negative territory. So it's certainly, pushing out more milk solids. It's mostly in the centre of the industry, central regions, upper Midwest and Texas, big call-outs there. When you then look at the differential between milk and solids, that's just widening, it seems, from where we were a year ago. So that's quite important trend to watch. Cow numbers were up very slightly month to month, and the year-on-year gap closed a little, which, is after some revisions, some reasonably chunky revisions in the past data. The only state to add cows of note was Texas in the month-to-month numbers, which is obviously to support new capacity.
The upper Midwest up year on year still.
They're still up year on year. The only big region that is ahead year on year. So, Joe, chart of the week to bring us home.
Yeah, well, bring us home, closer to home. And we're in New Zealand, where milk production numbers for June just came out. And you can see there June's are very, obviously, with the seasonal curve of milk production in New Zealand. June is a very small production month, but it does start to perhaps give us an indication of where the season's going. So milk production was down 2.2% in milk solids, but only 1.1% in volume. So that's the first flip in solids to volume since May 2022. And it's actually a 3.2% turnaround in solids trends from the previous month. So, maybe indicating that the dry, particularly in the South Island, is becoming a bit more of an issue. And given where milk price is, there's not really the incentive to feed to maintain production, even in these winter months where a lot of people are trying to maintain production. So this really tells a story, Steve. Soil moisture deficit. And on the left-hand side, we've got an historical average. Over to the right, we can see what the situation is at the moment. And it is well down compared to where we were in 2023 in the South Island there. So you're just seeing that issue in terms of pasture. And then I think we've got something on rainfall anomalies, which looks really gnarly. And this is very red in that South Island, Steve.
Yeah, essentially there's been enough stored moisture we had through autumn. There was good rainfall through there, but that's clearly stopped and getting worse. So, the reported problems in the South Island are the worst. In terms of season setup, well, I think it's week to week. We're going to start watching this now as to whether this changes and whether we do have some impact on the season startup and the spring production. So This gets onto the radar very quickly. The other thing I love before we close on this chart here is how NIWA, the New Zealand Weather Agency, on this chart in particular, put a little north indicator there just to remind us which way's up. Anyway.
Great to know from down under.
That's all from us. There are whales on the horizon. We are basking in great conditions where we are. We'll be back again next week.